The invitation was sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I let myself read it all the way through. Not because I was busy. I wasn't. I'm 68 years old, retired from 26 years of nursing at St. Mary's, and my days are mostly my own now. I had time to read it. I just didn't want to feel what I knew I'd feel when I did. My son's wedding invitation, my only child's wedding, and my name wasn't anywhere on it. Not on the hosted byline, not in the welcome note folded inside. His father's name was there, my ex-husband, who hadn't spoken to our son in 4 years until the woman he was marrying decided she liked the idea of a father figure standing at the altar, but mine wasn't. I had helped raise that boy alone from the time he was 9 years old. I had worked double shifts at the hospital on Christmases, on Easters, on his birthdays when I had to, so that we could keep the house in Decatur, so that he could go to Georgia Tech, so that he wouldn't have to carry the weight of debt into his 20s the way I had carried it into my 40s. And my name wasn't on the invitation. I told myself it was an oversight. I told myself a lot of things that week. His name is Raymond. He's 34 now, and when he was small, he used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I smelled like safety. I don't know when that boy became someone I had to make excuses for. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know it started around the time he met her. Her name is Brittany. She's pleasant enough when she wants to be, smiles like she means it, remembers your coffee order, says all the right things at the right moments. But there's a coldness underneath it that I noticed early and dismissed too quickly, because Raymond looked happier than I had seen him in years, and I didn't want to be the mother who couldn't let her son be happy. So I kept quiet. I smiled back. I brought casseroles to their apartment in Buckhead and told her she had lovely taste in furniture. And when Raymond called me 8 months before the wedding to say they were getting married and the venue cost $42,000 and they'd already put down a deposit using a credit card, I didn't hesitate. I said, "Let me help," because that is what I have always done. That is who I am, or who I thought I was. I want to say I gave the money freely without expectation, and in the moment I wrote that check for $28,000, money I had been saving in a dedicated account since Raymond graduated college, money I called my peace fund because I imagined someday it would buy peace for both of us, I did feel free. I felt like a mother doing what mothers do. What I didn't expect was to be told, 6 weeks before the wedding, that my seat assignment had been changed. Raymond called on a Tuesday evening. I was making chicken and rice. I remember because I turned the burner off and stood there holding the wooden spoon while he talked, and when he was done, I set the spoon down very carefully on the counter, like it might break. He said Brittany had decided to restructure the seating. He said the head table was going to be her immediate family, and her grandparents and his father's side. He said there wasn't a good way to fit everyone, and they thought it would be less awkward if I sat at a table near the back with my friends. Near the back. At my son's wedding. That I paid for. I asked him to say it again, not because I hadn't heard him. I had heard every word perfectly clearly. I asked him to say it again because I wanted to see if he would, and he did. Same words, calmer this time, like he'd practiced, like she'd helped him practice. "It's not personal, Mum. It's just about the layout." "Not personal." I said okay. I said I understood. I said I'd talk to him later, and I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen for a long time without moving, and the chicken burned a little on the inside of the pot, and I didn't care. Here is something no one tells you about being a mother. The loneliness is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in the way. Cold does, slowly, from the edges, until you realize you've been sitting in it for a while and you're not sure when it started. I thought about calling my sister in Cleveland, but she would tell me to pray on it. I thought about calling my friend Wanda, but Wanda has her own troubles with her son-in-law, and sometimes we just make each other sadder. So I sat with it by myself. I made a cup of tea. I looked at the photo on my refrigerator of Raymond when he was 11, grinning at Stone Mountain with his front teeth barely grown in, holding a hot dog in both hands like it was a trophy. I thought, when did I become someone he has to manage? 2 days passed. I waited for Raymond to call back and acknowledge what he'd said, or soften it, or apologize. He texted me to ask if I'd confirmed my dietary restriction with the caterer. That was when something shifted in me, quietly, like a gear turning over that had been stuck for years. I didn't call him. I went to my computer instead. The wedding venue. A restored estate in Roswell, Georgia, with white oak trees and a reflecting pool, had been booked through a contract that listed me as a co-guarantor because I'd been present when the deposit was confirmed and the coordinator had asked for a second name. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now I understood what it meant. I also understood that $28,000 had been transferred from my savings into a joint planning account that Raymond and I had opened together to manage wedding expenses. I had full access to that account. I had set it up. I had funded it. I called the venue coordinator the next morning. Her name was Ms. Portman, and she was professional and kind. And when I explained the situation, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very carefully, that she understood and that she would need to know how I wanted to proceed. I told her I wanted to put a hold on all remaining vendor payments pending from that account. She said she could do that. I thanked her and I hung up, and I sat for a moment in the quiet of my house, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, something steadier than anger. I felt like myself. There were 4 major vendors still waiting on final payments. The caterer, the florist, the photographer, and the string quartet Brittany had insisted on, even though it added $6,000 to the total. All of them had contracts connected to that account. All of them had been waiting on wire transfers that had not yet gone out. I didn't call Raymond that day. I thought about what I was going to do, and I thought about it carefully, the way I used to think through complicated cases on the floor. What are the facts? What are the options? What does the patient actually need? Not just what they're asking for. He called me on Thursday. He wanted to know if I'd seen his text about the caterer. I said, Raymond, I need to talk to you about the seating. He sighed. That small, tight sound that meant he was preparing to explain something to me slowly. Mum, we already talked about this. We didn't talk. You informed me. There's a difference. Silence. I have supported you your entire life, I said. I worked nights so you could sleep in a warm house. I went without a vacation for 6 years straight so I could build that savings account. I gave $28,000 to this wedding because I wanted to celebrate you, and you moved me to a table in the back of the room. He said, Brittany just felt. I said, I know what Brittany felt. I'm asking what you feel. Another silence, longer this time. I don't want to make her uncomfortable, he said finally. And there it was. After 34 years, after every night shift and every school meeting and every time I sat in a hospital parking lot eating a sandwich alone because I didn't have time to go home between shifts, after all of it, he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I said, I understand. I hope the 2 of you figure out the vendor payments. He said, what does that mean? I said, it means I love you, Raymond. I'll talk to you soon. And I hung up. He called back 4 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail, then again. Then Brittany called from her number, which she had never done before in 3 years, and I let that go too. The text started around 9 that evening. Raymond at first, asking what I'd done, saying the florist had called him, saying there was a hold on the account. Then angrier. Then, Mum, this is not okay. People have already RSVP'd. You can't do this. Then Brittany, with all due respect, this is incredibly manipulative and we are shocked. I read them all. I set my phone face down on the nightstand. I slept better than I had in months. My friend Wanda picked me up the next morning. I had called her the night before and said, I need to tell you something, and then I need to know if you want to go to Savannah next weekend. She'd said yes before I even finished the sentence. My other friend, Loretta, we've known each other since our kids were in the same little league. She said she'd been waiting for me to do something like this for 2 years. I want to be clear about something. I did not drain the account. I did not steal from my son. I froze outgoing payments from an account I had full legal access to and full legal right to act on. The $28,000 I had contributed was still there. I simply stopped the machinery from moving until someone was willing to have a real conversation with me. Raymond came to my house on Saturday morning. I opened the door and I could see from his face that he hadn't slept much. He looked like he did when he was a teenager and had done something he knew was wrong. That particular combination of sorry and defensive that I used to recognize immediately. He came inside. He sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee because that is what I do. He said, "Mom, the florist is threatening to release our date." I said, "I know. The caterer said they need confirmation by Monday or they start offering our slot." "I know that too." He looked at me. "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because I am your mother, and I will not be hidden at my own child's wedding like something you're embarrassed about." He put his face in his hands, and then, and this is the part I didn't expect, the part that cracked me open just a little, he started to cry. Not dramatically, just quietly, into his palms, the way men cry when they've been holding something too long. He said, "I didn't know how to tell her no." I said, "I know, baby. She has this whole vision. Her family is very—" He stopped. "It's been hard. She loves me, Mum. I know she does, but sometimes I don't know how to." "Raymond," I said, "I cannot fix your marriage for you. That is not something I can do. But I will not disappear from your life to make it easier. I am your mother. I am not a problem to be managed." He wiped his face. He was quiet for a long moment. "She needs to apologize to you," he said finally. "That's not okay, what she said to you, and I should have said something. Before." I said, "Yes, you should have." We sat there a while. The coffee got cold. I refilled it. I released the hold on the account 2 days later. I had one conversation with Brittany, brief, not warm, but honest. She apologized, though not the way I might have hoped. There was still a stiffness in it, a sense of someone performing the correct words rather than feeling them. But she said it. Raymond stood beside her and didn't look away. They reorganized the seating. My name was added back near the front. Not perfect, not exactly what I had imagined. But there, I won't pretend the wedding fixed everything. It didn't. Brittany and I are not close, and I suspect we never will be. There are things between her and Raymond that I don't fully understand and may never be invited to understand. Marriage is its own country. I know that. But here is what I know for certain. Wanda and Loretta and I went to Savannah the weekend before the wedding. We stayed in a little bed and breakfast on Jones Street, with window boxes full of geraniums and a porch swing that faced the garden. We ate shrimp and grits at a place Loretta had read about in a magazine. We walked through Forsyth Park on a Thursday morning when the fountain was catching the light just right, and I stood there for a moment with my coffee in both hands, and I thought, this is mine, this feeling, this morning, this morning, this mine, and no one can move me to the back of it. On the last night, we sat on the porch after dinner, and Wanda said, "You know what your problem has always been, June." I said, "Just one." She said, "You always assumed everyone was keeping score the same way you were." I thought about that for a long time after. She was right. I had spent 34 years giving time, money, energy, sacrifice, and I had quietly, without ever saying it out loud, expected that those deposits would mean something when the accounting came due. And when they didn't, when the math didn't work out the way I had imagined, I was blindsided, because I had never made the terms clear, not to Raymond and not to myself. I am not a cash register. I am not a resource to be drawn on and filed away. I am a woman who worked 30 years to build a life and raised a son largely on her own and has earned, fully earned, the right to take up space in that life, visibly, without apology, in the front of the room. Raymond called me the following Sunday, unprompted, just to talk. He asked how Savannah was. He said Brittany had mentioned she might want to have dinner soon, the three of us. I said I'd like that. I don't know what comes next. Families are long stories, and we are still somewhere in the middle of ours. But I know that something changed that week, something that needed to change for a long time. And I know that when I drove home from Savannah, the windows down, Gladys Knight on the radio, the Georgia pines blurring past on either side of the highway, I was not thinking about seating charts or vendor contracts or whether anyone was proud of me. I was thinking about the fountain catching the light, and I was smiling. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling the weight of it, the edges of it. What I keep coming back to is this. Raymond was not a bad son. He was a son who had never been asked to choose, and so he kept choosing the easiest thing, which was to smooth everything over and hope I wouldn't notice. That's not cruelty. That's the particular kind of cowardice that looks like kindness until it doesn't. And I wasn't blameless either. I had spent 34 years giving without ever making the terms clear, not to Raymond, not even to myself. I gave because I loved him. But somewhere underneath that love, I had also built an expectation I never spoke out loud, that the giving would be remembered, that it would matter when the accounting came due, and when it didn't, when he moved me to the back of the room without a second thought, I was blindsided, not because he was wrong to have his own life, but because I had never taught him that I was a person inside that life, not just a function of it. That is the thing I wish I had understood sooner. Generosity without self-respect is not virtue. It is just slow disappearing. What changed that week wasn't anger. Anger I'd had plenty of. What changed was something quieter, a kind of clarity. I looked at the situation the way I used to look at a complicated case on the hospital floor. What are the facts? What do I actually have the right to do? What does the person in front of me actually need, even if they don't know it yet? And I acted from that place. Not from hurt, not from spite, from a clear-eyed understanding of what was right. That is what I'd want anyone watching this to hold on to, not the frozen account, not the vendors, not the drama of it, but the moment before all of that when I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision from steadiness instead of from pain. That steadiness, the ability to think clearly when everything in you wants to react, that is something you build over a lifetime. You build it by knowing your own worth. You build it by being honest with yourself about what you will and won't accept. You build it by refusing, even when it is hard, to trade your dignity for someone else's comfort. Raymond and I are still a work in progress. Families always are, but something real shifted that week. For him and for me, he learned that I would not disappear quietly. I learned that I had to say it out loud to make it true. Wanda told me my problem was always assuming everyone was keeping score the same way I was. She was right. But here is what I know now. The only score that finally matters is the one you keep with yourself. Did I show up honestly? Did I act with my backbone intact? Did I choose, when it counted, to stand in the front of my own life? I did, for the first time in a long time. And I was smiling all the way home.